Everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my team selection. This will be as close to the final team selection as possible. I'll also be doing a live stream for those of you guys who will be around at the deadline. We'll be looking at the German lineup and hopefully changing our team as a result of that. Who knows, I might make a sort of last minute selection, but I have made some changes, and that has also included taking out a key sort of German player within my draft. And that's Gundogan. Gundogan has actually left my draft, but we'll see, and we'll talk about exactly why I've focused on some other players for now within my draft and what's made me change my mind. We've talked a lot throughout the week about a lot of different statistics, odds from my friend 11fi, even just market odds as well. And ultimately, I think we have very strong teams. I think one thing that people are definitely missing out on is the balance with the auto subbing aspects of the game. We do definitely want 15 players and you want 15 strong players, but at the same time, I think you also need to have the expectation that one of your players should at least be an enabler. So a lot of people are now creating, in my opinion, extremely well-rounded drafts that maybe have no flaws on paper, but you're also missing out on, the ability to just get some big guns by having an enabler. And at the same time, I'm also seeing a lot of people saving and cutting too many corners with their drafts. One thing that I actually really like about my most recent draft is that I have focused specifically on the man of the match aspect of the game, and I've change some of the players based on that as well. We'll talk about that as we get into it. The draft will feature, of course, 4 mega captaincies as well. So really secured really for the group stages. Then we have 2 free transfers. It's really about, in my opinion, targeting potentially Albania. In match day 2, we have 2 free transfers to do so. So I'll talk about just rough plans that I have in my mind. Anyways, let's get on towards match day 1 and my team selection. Hey everyone, just before we actually jump into my match day 1 draft, I do want to shout out all the viewers who've been watching and supporting the content so far for Euros 2024. However, still 50% of the viewers are still unsubscribed. So if you're enjoying the content, you're enjoying this international time of the season, do feel free to subscribe if you enjoy the content. And of course, if you stick around and you enjoy, for example, Fantasy Premier League, even better. I'll definitely be making content for that later on this summer. So in the defense, I've decided to save a little bit less money on the defense and go a little bit harder on it. The keeper pairing of Pickford and Lunin is one that I really like. The unfortunate thing, I suppose, with Lunin is that you can't pair Lunin with someone like Castile. So if you're someone who doesn't really rate, for example, England's defense, maybe due to, of course, some of the key players leaving the team, Stones obviously being a little bit uncertain as a player, same with Shaw, you're ultimately, of course, looking at the Belgian defense as probably the best option outside of the German one. The issue with the German one, of course, when you look at clean sheet odds, despite them being really high, is that, of course, unfortunately, Manuel Neuer is 6 million in the game. So Pickford's at a great price. So is Diogo Costa. To be honest, for the 5 million goalkeepers, I think we're kind of spoiled for choice. Sommer is great as well. However, I do think Lunin should be nailed as a 4.5 goalkeeper. For those people who really love the budget saving with the goalkeepers, don't really like to mess around with rotating goalkeepers, I do think going for Stanek, the 4 million keeper from Czech Republic, is actually a very interesting option, because if you go for Stanek, okay, fine, match day 1 isn't very good, it's versus Portugal, but the key thing is if you are going for a strategy where you're going to wildcard on match day 5, you can have access to a 4 million goalkeeper who has a great match day 2 fixture. And that should also allow you to sort of save up money with the other goalkeeper as well. I have, however, decided to spend money on my defense, as mentioned, and I've gone for Pickford and Lunin. In my opinion, Lunin is someone who is a little bit cheaper and worth the punt if he gets to start as Ukraine's goalkeeper. I really do think it's possible, since he became a sort of starting goalkeeper for Real Madrid. We saw starts from him from an international level in key matches for Ukraine in qualification matches. So I think that hopefully that will allow him to sort of maintain a spot, as well as his performance within the last match where they just kept a clean sheet. Obviously, Trubin kept a clean sheet as well versus Germany, but Lunin also made a great save last night. And honestly, I still think the position is for him to lose, and I don't think he's done anything wrong or created any missteps right now. Pickford, as I said, just a tried and trusted goalkeeper. England, as much as people do think that England have obviously dropped off as a defense, the reality is that they are coming in with a lot of historical form, particularly around the qualifiers. Lots of clean sheets there, potentially even no goals conceded. And then ultimately, the idea that even within these games, okay, fine, we've conceded versus Iceland, for example, but I don't think that we should necessarily overreact from that one result, and hopefully England can sort of play better and kick on. I have also decided to spend more money on the defense and actually go for Trent Alexander-Arnold. So I've gone for Trent here. I like the punt. There was sort of rumored news about Trent starting in the midfield for match day 1. That doesn't obviously mean that he's going to start for match day 2, but I really couldn't stop myself from the temptation of going for Trent. Obviously, a lot of intangibles for him at times, particular set pieces, which is something that is very, very nice for defenders. We know some other defenders within the game obviously have access to set pieces as well, but no one really at the sort of level of Trent, in my opinion, in terms of consistency when it comes to delivering set pieces. So I do really like that. And then Tah and Mittelstadt, once again, I still think that this is a pairing that's extremely well priced, given that Germany actually have the best clean sheet odds for matchday 1 and matchday 2 combined. And we do think Mittelstadt should start in matchday 1. As far as, let's say, Jonathan Tah, once again, it's just a toss-up between him and Schlotterbeck and whether one of the two starts for matchday 1, and hopefully that player keeps their spot. I do think it's Tah's spots to lose, so I don't really think that that's going to happen. DeMarco, in my opinion, is also just an insanely well-priced player and just incredible. The reason why I don't really want to cheap out on defense is because if you think about the auto sub element of the game, you always have to play 3 defenders. So if, let's say, one of your defenders stinks, you already are forced into, using one of those auto subs there, and you ultimately still have to keep 3 defenders. So I like the idea of having a very strong defense. I think this is one of the sort of best starting fours, really. And then at the substitution position is De Kuiper from Belgium, an attacking left back. So I do really like the sort of insurance from that. And ultimately, I'm hoping, of course, that at least 3 of my defenders can deliver. At the same time, I think with the Euro Fantasy rules, with ball recoveries as well, the ability for defenders to get points is still better than other fantasy games. And if you add in, for example, the man of the match element, it kind of makes it even crazier. So I do really like the idea of actually even punting on Mittelstadt as a captaincy for matchday 1. So that's sort of where I'm set when it comes to the 14th of June. Going towards the midfield, though, I have decided to move away from De Bruyne and go into Foden. And De Bruyne, in my opinion, is still amazing. Actually, when you look at the overall team numbers, the overall numbers for De Bruyne, of course, historically for Belgium too, he is a great player. And Foden, maybe on the contrary, is someone who hasn't necessarily delivered at that stage for England yet. However, for whatever reason, the markets are extremely high on Foden. And to be honest, after such a great season, I'm happy to buy into that sort of narrative as well. It also saves me 0.5 million within the draft. And the only unfortunate thing about this draft that I'm not so happy with is unfortunately dropping, triple Germany and triple Belgium. However, I think I'm happy with the sort of upgrades in certain other positions, like, for example, going for Trent. And I will still, once again, decide between whether I really want to go for Foden or tempt myself back with De Bruyne. But still, for now, we sit on Foden. And I do think the upgrade, for example, from Wout Faes to De Kuiper is also worth it from a sort of 0.5 million spending. And I do think Foden can even be equated with, for example, De Bruyne. So it's not really like De Bruyne is that much of an upgrade compared to Foden. As far as the midfield, though, you'll notice that Gundogan has left my draft. And he was actually someone who featured, first of all, in my initial draft and also within my latest draft. I think the only thing I'll mention about Gundogan is that he is still, once again, potential for an early substitution in matchday 1. And I still think that we're going to see that happen. Even though the matchup is so one-sided for Germany and Scotland, at least just on the looks of it right now, I do think the idea of going for these talismans here for Kvaratskhelia and also Szoboszlai is more appetizing than the idea of going for Gundogan, who plays in quite a stacked German team, right? Players like Musiala, Wirtz, Havertz can all do exceptionally well. They can steal man of the match from Gundogan. When you're looking at teams like Georgia and Hungary, though, it's very unlikely that too many contenders are there to take that sort of man of the match element away. So when it comes to sort of projecting points and even just thinking about how different scenarios of the game can go, I do like the idea of having these talismans here who are on penalties, who are going to play 95 minutes per match. And who knows, if let's say when you look at, for example, some of the odds and the team goal scoring odds for Georgia and Hungary, and they're very low, 0.9 to 1 goal, ultimately you'd expect that, for example, that contribution can come from one of these key players. So I do really like that aspect of the game and man of the match. So that's interesting. And then once again, going back to sort of my initial introduction to the segment here with Jorginho, I do think that we need an enabler in the draft. Yes, of course, I've tried variations of drafts where I'm trying to maximize on the 15 players, making sure that I have everyone who's rotatable, who's amazing. And of course, Jorginho, sticks out like a sore thumb. But at the same time, I think it's totally fine to have one enabler in a team of 14 great players. Now, obviously, maybe I shouldn't be spending so much money with the goalkeepers. As I said, Stanek is definitely an option to consider. Maybe I can even drop Lunin, but I do like the idea of having that sort of backup between Pickford and Lunin and sort of rotating between the two. It doesn't really hurt yourself to have a strong goalkeeper who actually keeps a clean sheet. And more often than not, we actually tend to see big teams lose their clean sheets, and that's fine. That happens, but it's nice to have that sort of insurance. As far as Jorginho, once again, it's really just coming down to that one game versus Albania, and then in the second game, he might be a little bit unflattering, but who knows? I might want to move away from a big hitter from, let's say, the English national team in Foden or Trent, or move down from another position if we find, for example, that, let's say, Arda Güler suddenly is starting for Turkey, and in match day 2, if I want to move into him, for example, even just as a punt so that I can enable another better transfer from Jorginho, that's something that I can also consider as well. For the time being, though, I do think Jorginho is a great enabler. And in the midfield, of course, I suppose the centerpiece is still Bruno Fernandes, right? I think he's a huge player for Portugal. We can see that he plays practically in any system and will still play in a much more advanced role compared to, let's say, what he does, functionally for Man United, where you can see him drop deep at times and you can see him defend very often, even playing out like a center back. So very happy with this sort of midfield right now. Let me know what your thoughts are on Kvaratskhelia and Szoboszlai as well, and whether you actually prefer, let's say, Gundogan or maybe even Eriksen for the time being. I just think that between match days 1 and 2, they're quite decent for these two players, and I think it is worth the gamble. And then in the forward line, we've actually made one change, and it's actually Lukaku, Mbappe, and Ronaldo. So we've decided to save 1 million and to move away from Kane. Now, the logic behind this decision was because I think that I'm sort of covered with the sort of, let's say, the 14th of June captaincy with a German player. On the 15th of June, we're looking at probably either a punt between Szoboszlai or Federico Di Marco. So I would probably lean towards DiMarco, but the Szoboszlai differential captaincy is also quite tempting, given that the fixture is actually quite good for Hungary. On the 16th of June, though, that is, where we can consider the Foden captaincy or the Trent captaincy. And a lot of people who I'll be competing versus will probably be looking at the Kane captaincy. And ultimately, I think when it comes down to it, I did kind of like the idea that I would just pass up on the Kane captaincy because I think Foden can be an exceptional punt, and I'm happy to have a differential, also knowing that on the 17th of June, you have that sort of perfect backup option in Mbappe, and once again, another perfect backup option in Cristiano Ronaldo. Both these players have still relatively similar fixtures to Kane, and so I think it's totally fine to sort of pass up on one of the main dominant options within the tournament and to still go triple England, but in a different way compared to most. And so I've decided to land myself, on this system here with Lukaku, Mbappe, and Ronaldo. Yes, of course, you can argue that I've been swayed by Ronaldo's performance and the left foot finesse in the previous match within the brace that he scored, but ultimately, we've always discussed within these drafts that option B has always been, what if I drop someone for Ronaldo? And in this situation, I've chosen to drop Kane over Mbappe. And I still think that, you can drop Mbappe, certainly. If you want to keep Kane in your draft, that's fine. But I've decided here to drop Kane for Ronaldo, and it's allowed me to get Trent effectively within another position within my draft. So this is where I've landed within my draft. And when it comes to match day 2, once again, we're talking about, targeting a team like Croatia. And I do think there are a lot of cheap Croatian defenders. We don't necessarily need to go for Guardiola, but we have a lot of routes towards certain players, right? Because we've gone so expensive within the forwards, when you look at match day 2, I mean, even if I'm, let's say, just trying to save money and then get an upgrade over Jorginho, I can easily do something like upgrading Jorginho and then dropping one of the forwards towards Patrick Schick, for example, or even a Mitrovic in match day 2. And I still think the team is very strong because the sort of talisman or talismanic options with Kvaratskhelia and Szoboszlai, in my opinion, can still easily persist through match day 2. We talked about that man of the match potential being a huge factor. England, Germany, these are all teams who have great fixtures match day 1, match day 2, so you don't really need to move them around. Same with Portugal as well. So ultimately, the only gap, I suppose, in my draft is, am I a little bit inflexible with going for Jorginho and DiMarco? Because if I move DiMarco away, I suppose there's no real upgrade away from Jorginho in match day 2. So that might be a sticking point within this draft, but I still think I'm comfortable with the idea of having just one enabler for match day 2 as well, even though Jorginho unfortunately has to face a pretty tough opponent in Spain. Of course, what might be even more interesting is if we can find, let's say, a cheap sort of differential option for match day 2 particularly from the Croatian defense. You know, we could obviously still upgrade Jorginho at that point in time, but that might be the only sticking point with this draft. And maybe I need a little bit of flexibility within the bank, and I might consider something like still keeping a Belgium defender and then dropping De Kuiper to, you know, Wout Faes, for example. But for now, I've decided on this draft. As I said, some of the other options to save money, if you're someone who's keen on doing that, is clearly, you know, going Lunin to Stanek, the Czech Republic keeper, De Kuiper to Faes, obviously is a pretty standard option. Foden, I suppose, if you want to drop him, I think you can very well just go for maybe 7 million mids over, let's say, Jorginho and Foden. Right now, I've gone for that setup, and it could very well, of course, look like another draft where it could be Gundogan and maybe another 7 million midfielder. And I think that's perfectly justifiable as well, or even Shaqiri at 6.5. But for now, I think I've tempted myself with these options, and the reason why I'm so high on Foden, of course, is because I do still need a captaincy option on the 16th of June, at least as things stand. So that's sort of how I've laid out my drafts. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoy the videos as we go on for the rest of the tournament. Keep in mind, of course, I will be live streaming before match day 1 starts, and I'll see you guys there.